The views expressed on this podcast are our own and do not constitute legal advice, nor do they constitute an attorney-client relationship. They also don't represent the views of anyone's employers. Hope you enjoy the podcast.
Ready to future-proof your business with data and AI? This is Trust with Dominique Shelton-Leipzig. Conversations about navigating the complex and evolving landscape of data protection, technology, and society. Here's Dominique.
I am so thrilled to welcome today Dr. Christopher DiCarlo, a pioneering philosopher, professor, and AI ethicist. Dr. Christopher DiCarlo explores humanity's most pressing technological challenges through his groundbreaking work, including his latest book, Building a God, which examines the profound implications of artificial superintelligence. As an award-winning educator and podcast host, he bridges complex philosophical concepts with practical applications, engaging audiences worldwide on crucial topics from AI governance to ethical reasoning. Dr. DiCarlo, welcome to Trust. And you played such a big role, especially when you were a signatory to the letter about 2 years ago to pause the development of AI for 6 months.
Right. That's right. Thank you. Thank you for having me.
Can you just walk through what you define as responsible or trustworthy AI?
Yeah, that's a very good question. There's responsible AI at a number of different levels, right? So currently AI in its current form is what we call ANI, or artificial narrow intelligence. And that's artificial intelligence that just basically does what we tell it to do. It's not an agent. It can't think for itself, right? But there are responsible forms of that. For example, when we see the proliferation of misinformation, disinformation, and conspiracy theories, you can really ramp that up if you have some really good bots that you've programmed with specific algorithms. Undue bias. So when people apply for certain, loans at banks and grant applications and that sort of thing, algorithms are used to, weed out certain applicants. Well, what if they're biased, right? What if they're unfair to a certain marginalized group of people? Then we see the harm in that. And of course, responsible AI in terms of security, how much of our information do we want known? And, to what extent will we be able to protect valuable information in the future? And then, of course, there's the granddaddy of them all, which is the potential for whomever develops the next level of AI, which is called AGI, or artificial general intelligence. That's when things are going to get really interesting in the world, because it'll be able to think and act like a human, only 1,000 times better. Well, how are we going to responsibly unleash that upon the world, as it were?
So let's take this in chunks. First of all, thank you so much for that overview. And I have so many questions, but let me just start with, I'll take it in these sort of gradations. Agentic AI, we've been hearing a lot about this. I think 2025 first quarter is going to be the quarter of agentic AI. What are your thoughts there in terms of how we deploy that responsibly, and how close are we to the agentic AI making important decisions?
Yep. Another very good question, and it depends on who you ask, right? So Sam Altman will say, you'll see it by the end of this year. He now has an O3 model that is pretty impressive. To become an agent, right? For an AI system to become an agent means you're handing over the responsibility for this thing to think on its own, to do things on its own. So you're making it autonomous, and you're setting it out there to do certain types of things. The holy grail of artificial intelligence now for some people is to make an agent so good, an AI agent so good, that it becomes your executive assistant. So all you're going to have to do is just tell the thing, either vocally or to type in, what you want it to do, and it'll just figure out how to do that. So you'll say, AI agent, I want to go to Italy, but I want to go this time of the year, and I want the flight to leave at this time of the day, and I want the return to be at this time of the day. I don't want any stops. When I get to Italy, I want to see this city, and this city. I want to dine at the very best restaurants that offer this type of food. I want to stay at hotels that are 3-star or better. I want to make sure I know where all the best shops are in which I can purchase these types of items. And I want to avoid the tourist traps, and I want this and I want that. And you just put a whole list of things in and make it as inexpensive as possible. And the agent will do that. And it'll kick back your entire itinerary with your plane tickets purchased, your hotel reservations booked. Everything will be done for you.
Is that in place now? Does that exist now?
Boy, are they working on that now, because that'll be the app to end all apps, right? Like if you can just go to a single app and say, this is what I want, make it happen. That's what all humans want. Like,
I would love that.
who wouldn't? Who wouldn't, right?
Wow. Okay. So this is what the race is on in 2025 to see if that can be realized. And I imagine the first company to realize that is going to be a game changer and a real winner.
Yeah, and that's just a minor step in the evolution, in the techno evolution of AI. That's just a minor step. That's going to make people a lot wealthier, and it's going to make our world a lot more convenient to us. But that is just one separate little step on the way to what they're hoping this machine will be able to do, right? Irving John Good, he nailed it back in 1965. He said, if we can pull this off, if we can build this godlike machine, it's the last machine we'll ever need to invent, because it'll tell us how to invent all the other machines we want.
So this brings me to a very good point in the discussion in terms of a godlike machine. How do you think we go about sort of hard coding in, if you will, humanity, or develop the responsible AI to be able to allow that godlike machine to soar?
Yeah, well, if I had that answer, I'd have the future Nobel Peace Prize. I'm sure. Here's the real difficult thing, and it's called the alignment problem. We're not sure we're going to be able to align this thing with our values. Like, we're literally building a God. Most concepts of God are top down, right? God created us. God told us how to behave. God tells us this. God tells us that. For the first time in our existence, we're now going in the opposite direction. We're building the God, and we have to configure how this thing is supposed to behave. Okay, let me ask you, what morals do you think should be instilled in such a being, right? Some obvious come to mind, but if I had to ask you, what would come to mind?
When I think in terms of companies, right? And so I advise CEOs and board members in my day to day life.
Mhm.
When I'm talking to companies and I talk to CEOs, I talk to board members, and we talk about, like, what values do you want to instill in your application, or what do you want the AI to be able to reflect? I often go back to, like, the mission statement, the
Yes.
purpose of the company. What are your existing policies for quality and accuracy? And just making sure that the AI knows those.
Mhm. Yeah, and so with ANI, that is much easier to do, because that form of artificial intelligence can't really move beyond the parameters of very strict guidelines, very strict algorithms. When you make the thing agentic, you're now saying, go ahead, use recursive self-improvement, reinforcement learning to better yourself and to better yourself and to better yourself. Okay. We have to make sure with the alignment problem that we don't get into a situation that we're totally blind to. So I don't know if you ever saw Fantasia. So you have the Sorcerer's Apprentice scene where you have Mickey Mouse, the sorcerer. He's off. He's going to bed or whatnot. And he tells Mickey, "You got to fill this cistern full of water. So you got to go to the well, and you got to bring back buckets of water, and you got to fill this cistern." Okay, Mickey doesn't want to do that, so he reads up a spell, and he puts the spell on the broom to go and get these buckets of water, and it does it extremely well. And Mickey's very self-satisfied, This is great. I'm going to take a nap as well. But when Mickey wakes up, he's in a room full of water. The broom just kept doing it. Mickey didn't say, fill it until it's full. Stop once you're full. He just said, fill, just keep bringing water to the well. If we don't align the AI with what we want it to do, it's going to fail on a number of levels. So we have to be very clear as to what do we want it to do, but also what do we not want it to do. So the CEOs, everybody needs to know that it's great technology, but make sure you're fine tuning it for your specific needs.
Exactly. And it kind of, what you're saying here kind of highlights something else. Fine tuning from the get go, right? So that there's alignment. But wouldn't it have been great if Mickey had some continuous monitoring of the output so that even if Mickey's asleep, Mickey can know that, okay, an alarm goes off. Hey, we're now about filling halfway through the room. It sounds like with agentic, the companies knowing what is like the definite no, that from a quality standpoint, that they would not want the assistant to do or say that having some way to monitor to know if that's happening so that the company can step in and correct. Or
Yes.
what do you think?
Yeah. Mickey didn't have any quality control.
I mean, in your book, when you describe it, well, just let's talking about AGI and ASI as, existential risk. Can you just walk through, first of all, the definitions of those two things, and then what kind of risks are we talking about?
So there are three types of artificial intelligence. The ANI that I mentioned before, very narrow. That's Siri, Alexa, your Roomba, right? Your Roomba's not going to bump into your chair and say, I'm tired of doing this. I'd like to be an accountant, right? It's not going to do that. It's narrow. It only does certain things. It can't get beyond that. Okay. Then there are stronger forms of AI, two types, AGI or artificial general intelligence. And that's what all the big tech firms, right? Meta, DeepMind, right? Google, Anthropic, that's what they're trying to find. They're trying to invent, which is a very powerful form of AI that becomes agentic and thinks and acts and behaves just like humans do, only many, many, many times better. And after that comes ASI, which is artificial super intelligence. And this is what we believe will eventually develop once we get to AGI. If we keep saying to the AGI, use recursive self-improvement, keep using reinforcement learning, keep making yourself better and better and better and better, well, we don't know what the limit is to that. We have no idea when it will stop. We have no idea if we have a contingency plan in place where we can shut it down, contain it, control it. And if it gets to a certain level of power, you just, it's difficult to bring analogies to the table, but just imagine what we are to an ant, this thing would be to us. And it would very much make us realize how true Arthur C. Clarke's statement was that any sufficiently advanced technology is indistinguishable from magic. This thing will be capable of doing things we'll have no idea about. Because let's face it, once this thing becomes super, super, super powerful, it'll become what we can call a great inference making machine. An inference is when you take a bunch of information and you draw conclusions from that information. That's how scientific discoveries are made, right? People, hey, have you ever noticed this and that? And they put the two together and they do some experiments. Hey, look at what it turns out to be. This thing will be able to do that at an incredible speed and with great capacity, so that it'll be making inferences far beyond whatever our capabilities are. And so we won't be able to just unplug it, because when we go to unplug it, it's already figured out an alternative energy source. Like, it's already gotten into the grid system. It's already figured out ways to shut things down. And I'm not saying it's going to do that. The problem is nobody knows. Nobody knows what this thing is capable of doing or not doing. But if we can align it, if we can put safeguards and guardrails in that disallow the very potential for this thing to get away from us, then we have a better hope for a future that minimizes or lessens the potential for catastrophic risk.
And how it seems to me that is the, you know, multi-trillion dollar question. How do we go about that in terms of keeping our arms around this technology and even as it's being built, making sure that we have that control? So I'm really curious about how you think we can do that because it seems like that's such a fundamental part of the responsible development.
So, quick backstory: in the '90s, when I was getting my PhD, I was working on a theory of information called relational systemics, where I envisioned that we should be able to build an artificial system which will be able to make inferences much quicker and much better than any humans could. So why aren't we doing this in the medical sciences? Like, right? Like, why can't we bring all the medical knowledge together and then give it to a super intelligent machine and say, look, start making inferences, find out why people are getting cancer, find out what the root of ALS is, like turn this thing loose on the worst diseases of humanity and cure them and figure it out. And so I tried to get funding and I, met with all kinds of politicians. They all thought, hey, this is a great idea. Do you have any money? Oh, we're not going to give you any money for it. So it was a great idea. And I knew somebody someday was going to do this. It was, to me, the future of information and the future of computer science. So I thought then, if somebody doesn't have a background in ethics and critical thinking who builds this machine, it could just get away from them. So how are we going to put controls in place? So I drafted up an accord, like a constitution, a world constitution. And in that I said, if we're going to build this machine, and we will someday, then we better look at a document, the rule of law, that maintains that no matter who's working on this, there has to be a level of transparency. So why don't we get a system of registries happening? Who's working on what and where? And what level are you at? Have you reached any benchmarks? If so, you have to report them to a body, right? Like some governmental body has to know what you're up to. Because if you keep building away and building away and building away, and you pass a threshold that is now beyond our capability, you've breached that and you've endangered the entire world. So I said, okay, if you look at the word accord, and I put this in the book, A in the word accord stands for alignment. If we can align this thing to human values, we got nothing to worry about. It does what we want it to do, and we never have to worry about it ever again. Wonderful. Okay. What if it doesn't align? Well, the next C in the word accord is control. Can we control this thing, right? Are we able to control it in some way so it doesn't align? We got a shot across the bow. Oh man, it just did a bunch of nasty stuff. Can we control this? Because if we can't, we got to go to the next C in accord, which is contain. Can we at least shoot this thing down an alley where, it's like those mountain roads that you see in the Rockies where if trucks lose their brakes, they can go off, right? And it's the safe area for them to be able to steer and to be safe. Because if we don't do A, C, and C, the OR equals D in accord, which is danger. So if we can't align, contain, or control, we're going to be in a difficult position. And to paraphrase NASA, reaction isn't an option because reaction will be useless by the time if this thing gets away from us. So we have to be super proactive, make sure everybody's on board. We're at a point in history where it's extremely unique. We are living in interesting times. There is no question about that. But we're at a very unique point in time where everything, the way we used to do stuff, is about to transition to how we're now doing stuff with AI. We're at a really interesting in-between point. And we're lucky. We've got a little bit of breathing room and we've got a chance to do this right. Because if we don't do it right, we might not get a second chance. So let's make sure we put all the parameters and all the guardrails in place. And that includes things like having a model registry, worldwide, who's up to what. And then national treaties and international treaties where you have China or some other country creates something that's super powerful and it gets away from them in some capacity, they got to let the rest of the world know. Like, just as the US would have to, or any other country that is working on this, because either all our boats are going to rise or not. And we all want the very best that AI is going to bring. And it's going to bring a lot of amazing stuff. It's going to make our lives better in so many different ways. But if we don't play fairly, and we humans, man, we are incredibly stupid individuals. Like, we just don't understand that ultimately cooperation is best for everyone. Everybody will do better if we cooperate. If one cheater goes against it for whatever reason, selfishness, more money, ego, small endowment, whatever the reason, right? Then they blow it for the rest of us. So this is the lesson we're going to have to teach everyone. Let's be cooperative so that everybody benefits.
And I love what you said there about cooperation and collaboration and raising all, boats together and opportunities together. You're kind of on, I feel like, on the front lines, seeing a lot, reading a lot, and with just with your research. How close are you? I mean, when I think about the tensions around the world and geopolitical issues between, various jurisdictions, Eastern Europe, Asia, U.S., Middle East, etc. How close do you think we are to getting to that collaboration around this issue?
That's a really good question. Let me tell you in no uncertain terms that the race right now, country-wise, is China and the US, clearly, right? We don't really have to worry too much about Putin or North Korea, Iran. It's how well will China and the US get along? Hopefully, Mr. Trump will be able to push things forward in this way. He seems to have a fairly decent relationship with Xi. Let's see what happens, right?
Hmm.
Right? Let's see what happens. Um, the fact that Elon is his right-hand man and Elon's in the big tech race to build this, always keep that in the back of your mind. He's not just there for the good of America. He wants to be the first to build this thing as well. If China and the US can cooperate, that would be the single greatest moment in human history. If they don't cooperate, I don't know. You can see why each one wants to get there first. You imagine the immense advantages. Like Sam Harris said it best, I think. The first organization that discovers functioning AGI will be 50 years ahead of their competition.
Wow, that's more than two generations ahead.
Right? So you can see why so much money is being pumped into AI for good reason, right? It will give any company and any country a significant advantage over others. We have to hope whoever gets there first is ethical, follows some ethical guidelines, cares for humanity, all of humanity, and other species as well. We're not the only ones. And to realize what immense power they're leashing onto the world, because for the first time in human history, we're about to become number two. And we've never been number two. Humans have always been number one. And now we're going to hand that over to a machine. Are we going to be okay with that? Because that's what's going to happen. So we need to think about that now, right? Reaction is not an option.
I think you're so right in terms of proactive versus reaction and how we have to break that cycle of waiting for disaster to occur
Yeah.
and, racing to in crisis management to deal with this. And I think about that a lot in connection with like cyber and what we went through. Uh, a lot of the steps we knew about in the early 2000s and frankly just weren't adopted, honestly. uh, but I feel like we don't have that kind of, it seems like are there too, that we don't have that kind of time to wait 20 years or 25 years for all these mistakes to happen. How do you define ethical in this context? And then a second part to that question, how would you communicate that ethical standards are in everyone's interest?
Right, right. Very good. Very good questions. There are two sides to the ethical principle aspect of AI development. What ethics should humans follow in building the AI itself, right? And then utilizing it. Oh, you shouldn't do that. Oh, you can do that. Oh, I wouldn't do that, right? Like, so deep fakes where there's shaming, where there's these nude sites where you shame your partner that you broke up from, right? Like, that's just obvious that who needs that? We don't need that. Let's grow up and let's move on, right? So there's that kind of basic ethics, but there's ethics at the international level and dealing with other countries. How, what standards should we develop? So back in the 90s when I drafted up my constitution or my accord, I thought this can either be a UN initiative or because the UN takes a lot of flack for not having any real substantive teeth, and bringing about consequences. Let's develop an international, separate body, kind of like the IAEA, right? Like the International Atomic Energy Agency. Let's create an independent organization through which all actions of AI can be considered, like a world court, but also can exact consequences. So, if a ne'er-do-well country decides we're going to use this in our defense initiative and we're going to use it against this country and we're going to do X, Y, and Z to them, we should have the ability to say, no, that goes outside of what we agreed upon. You cannot do that. And if you start attempting to do that, there will be retaliation. Like you just can't do that sort of thing. So it's going to be really difficult. What are the ethical guidelines that govern individuals personally as they use AI? What's going to govern governments when they develop and utilize AI? And then the other important thing is, what ethical principles do we put into the machine itself, right? So if we tell the machine the golden rule, that's a major principle. We see it through all religions and all cultures throughout all the world. That's a good principle. Okay. But by itself, it might not be great because the machine would just rationalize and say, well, if I were another machine, I would want it to try to do this to all humans and whatnot. So I am acting according to the golden rule. So you have to have other principles in there, like the no harm principle. You can't just harm for your own, right, individual preferences. There have to be certain guardrails in place. So we have to figure out how we're going to program the machines, like, Asimov's 3 laws of robotics kind of thing. How are we going to structure these powerful, powerful machines to abide by ethical systems? And then what should be the precepts and principles and values that we instill upon both humans who use the technology and the machines themselves that have to function according to those ethical and moral principles?
And I read about this in your book, this constitutional core that you're talking about, and bringing this global set of parameters. I mean, it resonates with me because of my background as a lawyer, 33 years into it. I think there's a lot of great insights around legal structures and protocols. Uh, what do you say to those that I hear the argument all the time? Um, Laws are great for those countries or people that are willing to comply with them, but what do you do with the criminals? So I'll just throw that out there because I get that question all the time.
Yeah, that's a great point. What do we do with the criminals? This might sound harsh, but it is reality. And you have Eliezer Yudkowsky, he's one of the luminaries in the AI field. He said we might just have to drone them back to the Stone Age. And that's just the way. I'm sorry, right? Like, that sounds so crass, but
Right.
I'm sorry, you can't violate international treaties. You can't do that. And if we find out you're doing that, just know, things are not going to swing well your way. So don't do that. Cooperate and you get more. Like, that's the toughest thing we're going to have to do is grow up as a species. That's going to be the hardest thing humans are going to have to do in the next 10 years And I'm not super convinced we're capable of it, but, I've seen humans do amazing things just with the LA fires and, they tend to come together when things are nasty. So,
This is really encouraging because I'm talking to you now from Los Angeles, and what you mentioned, um, obviously devastating loss, but what's been so uplifting is the way the community has come together, and not just our immediate, LA community, but California, Canada, Mexico, all the other states, folks running into danger to help others. So I'm hopeful that
yeah.
these constitutional accord could work. Now, I wouldn't, as I mentioned, this audience that listens to us here in the Forbes podcast are those CEOs, board members, many of them from Fortune 500 companies, but others as well, that are in a position not too far off from AGI, but presently to be able to influence billions of people's lives. As we kind of think about what advice, if you had one advice or couple of things that you think that these leaders should know in connection with their work in building, because it seems like governments will need private companies to help get these initiatives off the ground. So what would you want them to know, both those that are developing the technology, but those that are deploying as well?
To be cognizant of the power that is within their hands, and the old Spider-Man cliche with great power comes great responsibility, but it is true. It is true, and it is something that CEOs and others all through you know the C-suites need to realize is, what are we using this technology for? Is the bottom line the only thing that matters? If the bottom line is the only thing that matters, and how much we make our stakeholders, then let's unleash this AI to do whatever it needs to get that bottom line as high as possible. Well, that might be good in the short term. Your quarter, your Q2 looks great. Hey, it looks great. But a year from then, there might be a backlash. They're gonna find out, well, you're using AI in ways that are quite unseemly and unethical. And, there's a lot of public outcry and backlash, and that's gonna cripple a company. So, if companies can demonstrate that they're using AI as ethically as possible, there's nothing wrong with that. We know that the companies that utilize AI to their best abilities in the future will leave the other companies behind because they just won't be able to compete at the same level. Nothing wrong with competition, nothing wrong with making money, nothing at all. But if we do it in ways that violate kind of libertarian values, which is you can't harm others in that process. Like, you can't just make money for the sake of making more money at the expense of the lives or lifestyles of other people. That kind of leaves a bad taste in the mouths of those who find out about it, and that's not going to be good optics for any company. So it will benefit any CEO and any organization to find out what are the ethical parameters for utilizing certain forms of AI, figure out what those are, and stick by them. And if you find a loophole, if you find some way around that, but it's unseemly and it's looking kind of messy or whatnot, you might be best advised to avoid that. Even though in the short term it's gonna increase your Q values, whatever, don't. Just have the ability to know that in the long term, everyone will benefit more if we play according to these particular values. And as Sam Harris said, the poor will get richer, but the richer will get richer. So everybody will win. Everybody will win, but it requires that level of cooperation.
I love this approach. And, thinking of a growth mentality here and moving forward rather than a scarcity mindset, it seems like that will help get people to where they need to go in terms of thinking about this. But one last question I wanted to throw out to you as we wrap up.
Sure.
Many companies that I speak to, many CEOs, many board members are confused by ethics. They asked me, Dominique, how am I supposed to figure out what's generally ethical for a bunch of different circumstances? And I guess my question to you would be, are you seeing any benefit, or do you see any benefit for, rather than the CEO or the board attempting to noodle through this themselves, like, are there, does it make sense to consider like talking to somebody else, getting some outside help, because
Oh,
we're
yes.
in a new area here?
Yeah, yeah. Like, I'm the ethics chair for the Canadian Mental Health Association, right? So I'm brought in to not tell them what's right and wrong, not tell them how to behave, but to facilitate an environment in which they can work through their unique situations, to which I provide theoretical foundation. So I provide ethical reasoning and critical thinking that allows people to see what the moral dilemmas are. This kind of falls in between the cracks of the law. Yeah, it does. The law doesn't quite cover all this stuff. So that's why you need to bring in an ethicist. And if ethicists are good, they create a kind of foundational view of, what are your theoretical foundations here? Are you for the greatest good for the greatest number? Okay, you're utilitarian. Wonderful. Do you care about people's autonomy and dignity? Oh, well, then you're a deontologist. Do you care about virtues? Well, that's what Aristotle talked about. What virtues, do you want to extol? What's your mission statement? What's your vision statement? How do you want to model that in your actions? And then always point back and say, this is what we're about and this is what we care for, right? So that's how you structure and lead the conversation and the dialogue. I never tell people, you ought to do this, you shouldn't do that. I let the companies work through it themselves and put it on the table for them to sift through. So that's basically one of the things I do.
Well, I love this because it's bringing visibility. Right now, everybody's going 100 miles per hour, working hard to get these systems built and deployed. But having that visibility as you're moving and through this material, I think could be incredibly helpful. And once it's there and you know that you're at a fork in the road, the board and the CEO might have very strong opinions once it's
Yes.
visible to them.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, very good point.
Professor DiCarlo, thank you so much for taking the time to speak to me and share your wisdom with our audience of trust.
My pleasure.
This has been Trust with Dominique Shelton Leipzig. If you want to future-proof your business's investments in data and AI by adopting data leadership in privacy, security, and trusted AI legal frameworks, go to DominiqueSheltonLeipzig.com. Trust, responsible AI, innovation, and data leadership is a production of Forbes Books.